good afternoon. I recognize in the room with me a bunch of very dedicated, hard-working school folks. And congratulations to you. Because before I start today, I want to make some announcements about our successes. Did you know that last year we graduated a higher percentage of kids in Las Cruces Public Schools than we have since I've been here? I'm just about to wheel up in the 7th year. Did you know that almost 3/4 of our kids graduated on time? Did you know that we gave more scholarships, that's assistance to students going to college and higher education, than we have in over 20 years? Did you know that we have a dedicated staff who works with us and for our children? Did you know that our community gave more money, more support, and more volunteer hours than it has during the entire time I've been superintendent of schools? Now, it's not a decade here, but I have been a superintendent since 1983. That's about 30 years in the wheelhouse. And this afternoon, I want to reflect on some things that are happening and on a rally that's happening outside in a few minutes, and just draw a little focus on where we are and maybe where we might contemplate going. Because you see, these are important times. I talked to my cabinet the other day, and I said, I feel like we're in a tsunami. It's kind of a tsunami of change. When I came to work as a superintendent in 1983, they had just published a book called A Nation at Risk. And it said in that statement that the national education system in America was failing. And we were creating a risk in America where we would no longer be a world power. It's because we had to pay attention to education. And in part, they were right. Our kids are horribly important, aren't they? In fact, many of you sitting here today in leadership positions came out of that system of the last 30 years. Congratulations. You are good at your craft. You do good work, and so are the teachers that work with us and the folks who help us educate our children. And I don't want us ever to lose sight of that. But I also don't want us ever to lose sight of the very important challenge we have to ensure we have quality education happening in the Las Cruces Public Schools every day, in every class, for every child. Because it's not okay not to meet that marker. And that's really what this debate's all about. You see, we are in a national debate. We have been for over 30 years, and we continue to be there because times are tough in America. Times are tough in our economy. We have more challenges than ever before. We have more broken families than ever before. We have more social development issues in America than ever before. And in education, we reflect what America is. And we have to deal with the challenges that we go home to every day. And that's really what we're talking about at this point. Now, everybody has a different idea about how to get there. They've had that for 30 years. I was reflecting on one of the issues that they'll be talking about here in the rally, which was about our new teacher evaluation system. I was taking a walk last night. Yeah, I finished walking at 1:30 this morning because things were churning in my head after a board meeting last night, so poignant to me that I couldn't turn it off. When I walked, I started to reflect, what is going on? Why are we where we're at? It's because everybody I know wants to do a right thing, a good job, to fix the stuff that needs to be fixed. And we have a tremendous debate going on, and we have ideologies that are very different. But in 30 years, I'm here to tell you something, I've lived through it, we have ideology differences in America, and that's what makes us strong, but that's also what makes us challenged. And we're right in the middle of that tsunami today. But here's what else I know. Every one of our kids, every one of them, deserves every day for us to do the best job we can, to bring the best system to them. Do you know a kid who this year graduates from Las Cruces Public Schools, enters a world where their entire future looks like this? They are likely to go into 7 career fields in their lifetime. 2 of those exist today. 3 of them are coming. They're being invented as we speak. And you know the crazy thing about it? 2 of them they will invent. So the thesis we have is, how do you prepare for that future? And that's never been the question before. Never. And that's the challenge we have. Now here's another thing that's happened. We have lost the respect and the support of some of the folks we serve. We have. Our public says we're not accountable enough. And in sometimes they're right. They say we're not transparent enough. We hide behind practices and what we're doing, and we're not complete in what we do. And sometimes they're right. And we've got to be better at that. And that's part of what this debate is and part of what this process is. Now, the political powers move back and forth through time, and we have right now before us a set of propositions that we must serve. You see, as superintendent of schools, one of the things I don't get a buy card on is not doing what is prescribed under regulation or law. I can't break the law. It's not allowed. There's something called the New Mexico Administrative Code. If I break it, I can cease to be a superintendent. So with that on one side, and the need to do what's thoughtful, right, and effective on the other, puts all of us in a bind, including me. So as I walk at night, I try to think about, how do you do that? And I know that every one of you are doing the same thing. I know that every teacher, I heard last night at the board meeting, are worried about doing the right thing. They're worried about their job. Let me tell you something about that. New Mexico Teach, the new evaluation system, is really, in especially the classroom observation part, probably the best I've ever seen. That's a fact. Now, that's not politically expedient to some, but it's a fact from my chair. In fact, it's quite brilliant. But I hear little debate about that, by the way. I hear debate about something that we have as information for you that's about the rest of the story. So let me reflect a little bit about that. In our teacher evaluation systems, we have always looked at several factors. We measure the art and science of teaching by the teacher. That's a component of every one of the 7 sets of evaluations I've dealt with in my career. Every one of them looks at the connection and the appropriateness that the teacher develops for student learning and the outcomes that come out of that as students move through that system. And what does that teaching produce? All have measures about the learning environment. You know, when you walk in a classroom, we have expectations. I tell staff all the time, and we live this in this district, a student deserves to be in a setting where they're respected, where they feel they are better than they were from the house they left. Safer, better cared for, and better provided for. That's what our system asks us to do. And it's quite a challenge. And by the way, every one of those systems has measured the compliance we have with the latest rules, the latest regulations, and the latest bureaucratic requirements. Every one of them. So I don't see this a lot differently. I'm sorry. I see a lot of concern and upset over something I've seen going on through time. What we are in our education system is a resilient group, because we're a resilient society. I ask us to have that resiliency. I ask us to think about some things. Here's some things that I'm not sure we always meet the requirement of. I'm not sure we show mutual respect all the time. When you have different ideologies, what makes America great is if you believe this and try to explain it to that, and then believe that and explain it to this. In America, we don't go to fighting each other about it. We go to resolving that. You see, we're not Congress here. We have to have answers. Because we can't just turn our system off for a week or 2, or 3 or 4, or a month. Because every day, guess what? Our children come to the classroom. And you know the good news? We teach them. Every day we teach them. And I'm so proud of that. I'm proud of our teachers. I am. I'm proud of our Board of Education. These are unsung heroes. Did you know something? Boards of education in New Mexico receive no compensation for what they do. They serve the hard task of making policy and supporting regulation and process and giving public insight to we who do the business for nothing. And I have some board members here today, and I want to recognize and appreciate their efforts and recognize their tireless efforts they put on every day as they visit classrooms and go about their business at this dais behind me. We have a magnificent board, by the way. Did you know that? We really do. And a magnificent staff. So I'm going to ask all of us to have respect for each other. I think that's an absolute necessity. Teachers, other educators, administrators, especially frontline principals, and I see many of you in this room. This is hard business. Oh, parents, and one that I want to insist on our children. Have respect for our children. And you know, respect for children does one or more things. One of the things it does is it takes the crescendo out of their life so we can educate them and allows our adult conversations about our adult problems to be in our adult settings and not in our classrooms. And I'm going to insist on that. They deserve nothing less than that. I'm going to insist that every day as we continue through this debate and this dialogue, that we carefully contemplate the other side. Because something I know about America is a place where our standards and our directions come from compromise and careful consideration. And we really do believe that you build a better mousetrap by holding hands rather than pushing back on each other. And it's time to do that. It's time to do that. We need to work together to assure that whatever system we finally put in place this time around, because there will be others, shall I live long enough and continue being gainfully employed as a superintendent, I think I might see a couple of others yet before I leave and go to the pasture. But I'm going to suggest we make it as good as we can because it does affect what we do every day. You see, we do need good teaching. We do need to have that discussion. We do need to have that adult conversation between professionals to be sure our system is responsive to our kids' needs. And I just gave you a tapestry of change about what kids are going to need. That means our system can't be and do what it's always been and done. Our system has to be malleable and change and predictive about what future needs are and prepare children for that. That's why every child has to read at their appropriate level. That is an absolute sacred must-do. And we have to know whether we meet that. You see, one of the balances we have going today in our system is this. I grew up on a ranch, so pardon me being a little agricultural for a minute. But if you have a herd of cattle, you do take them to a barn and you put them across scales periodically to see if they've gained weight. There is a science to that, in fact. Did you know that? As you fatten steers, there is a science to that. And if you don't do it, you lose money. But you can overdo that. You can take them to the weighing house, to the scales, every day. March them through there. And you're going to waste time for them to go out and graze and feed and become fattened and become healthy. And my fear is that we have to find that same balance in our educational system. We have to figure out how to feed them and weigh them and not infringe on either. Because you can only teach and not measure, and you've got a problem, Houston. But you can do an awful lot of measure and not of teaching, and you still have a problem, Houston. And what we really need is a balance. So as we look at differing ideologies, those who want to weigh them, those who want to feed them, I really believe everybody wants to do both. We're just not quite sure what that balance looks like. I would suggest that those of you in this room and the other 3,800 employees, 1,600 teachers in this district can figure that out for every one of our 25,000 kids in the Las Cruces Public Schools. And I'm simply going to ask us to do that. I don't know what the future holds. I know what it shouldn't hold. It shouldn't hold upset. It shouldn't hold disdain. It shouldn't have disrespect What it should have is good practice. It should have positive outcome. I think we need to take emotion and move it to promotion. I think we need to take reaction and make it proaction. And I, for one, am going to call on this district to do that. And as your superintendent, I'm going to try very, very hard not to get sucked up into the vortex of trying to fight the unnecessary battles and instead go into the tsunami of change of education that means something for our kids. And I'm simply going to ask you to be part of that. Now, there's going to be a rally out here, and I'll tell the press I won't be there. I don't think that's appropriate for me in this leadership situation. I think I need to listen. I think I need to watch. I think I need to understand. But I'm not emoting about it because I don't believe that's where I need to be. I think I need to be in the promoting. I'm going to work my very best diligently with our Secretary Designate of Education because that's part of the tapestry of what goes on. At the same time, I want to work with my colleagues who are in our representative unions because that's part of our job too. I want to continue working with every parent. Do you know that just 2 nights ago, 277 parents completed training through our Institute for Parental Engagement that will make them a better advocate for their child. 277. That is real change. That is effective promotion. That is effective proaction. Because every one of those parents, as we heard them talk about what they learned and how they're going to act, I guarantee you will go home and create a better environment because teaching doesn't happen just at our house, it happens at their house. And that teamwork, that adult effort to make sure children succeed is what it's all about. And it's probably time for me to quit teaching. My dad was a Methodist preacher, and he always told me that when the offering plate went around, he should stop. I'm not putting the offering plate around, but it's probably time for me to stop. Let me answer a few questions if there are any.
Just, in terms of, you were mentioning, that you're not going to be at the rally because in your position, it's not appropriate. What did you feel, and was it somehow tied in with the school board meeting last night, the need for having a press conference today to talk about these things today?
Well, first of all, I don't want it misunderstood why I'm not at the rally, to be honest with you. I think it's important that you as the press and our public understand this isn't an adversarial relationship. What happens today at the rally are teachers who feel they must be heard. They must emote about that, and that's a very important part of the overall puzzle as we deal with differing ideologies and, I'm sorry, the environment of change. Change isn't easy. Do you know that the only people who like change are babies in dirty diapers? Don't see many of them out there. But I'm resolved, and I don't need that. But I respect that, and I support that. It's a part of the process. But I don't want to confuse that I'm not there. Yes.
The other thing, really quick too, is how, from your end, from the people that have to implement it, because when we go out there, when we talk to the teachers out there, they're going to be talking a lot about this evaluation system.
You bet.
How gelled is it on your end in terms of what you're going to have to do with the evaluation system?
So I'm going to spend a minute and show you this chart. I know you as the press received it. This is the newest rendition of what the teacher evaluation system under New Mexico Teach looks like. I will make one comment. I've gone through lots of change, as I said, during my career. We're going very, very rapidly into this change. I caution us about that. Speed sometimes doesn't have as much productivity as careful staging. I'm not saying this isn't well thought out, and I'm not even saying it's not carefully staged. I think we need to be cautious about our speed. As an example, my principals have all gone through a tremendous amount of training as far as the classroom observation tool that we're using. And as I talk with them individually, and I have talked to all of them in the last 2 weeks, all of them, they tell me they are prepared to go do that. Better prepared maybe than they've ever been to use a classroom observation tool. And in fact, what they describe when they go in the classroom as far as their expectations or what they call their look-fors are very consistent between them, and that's good news for all of us. Now we have to make sure they're the right ones, and I think they are. As I said, I think this system is quite exquisite. It has a lot of good research behind it. And so I think for once in a long time, as we go into classrooms, we know what we're looking for, and I also think we understand how to have that conversation with our teaching staff about what we see and what they expect to see. Our challenge is them understanding the system, because they haven't been trained. And I think it's probably incumbent upon us at the district to do that work. And that struggles, because until you understand things, it's hard to feel good about them. But as we get into conversations, I know that our heart is in the right place and our efforts in the right place. Now there's a rest of this that really is the story, and most of this is about how much do you put on testing as far as the teacher evaluative part of this. And in this model, half of it is around some very specific testing. And that really seems, as I listen to the teachers I've talked to be the greater debate. And we're in a kind of interesting place. We're going through a change in our teaching standards. Oh, by the way, I've gone through 7 evaluation systems. I think I've gone through a half a dozen teaching standards systems also. And it's all about ramping up about that future I talked about. What do students need to know? Well, kindergartners don't need to know calculus. But unfortunately, they do need to have a very carefully engineered education that assures they'll understand calculus when they get to it, more than ever before. And we're having to figure that out. And I didn't have that when I started teaching in 1973. I didn't have that. And I do now. And I was a math teacher. I was pretty doggone good at it. I'm not sure I could get to the same end product now. I'm not sure I have those skill sets. I have to go back and retrain. You see, that's part of the deal too. If you're a senior teacher and you've been doing it for a long time, you know a tremendous amount, you have a tremendous value. But one of the things I will tell you is you have to continually retool yourself as you go into this future. And so those are things that are there. We have one that is fairly controversial in this system, and it has to do about a 10% criteria about looking at certain teacher characteristics. Let me give you a short script on that. We initially submitted multiple measures, 8 of them, for the state to look at for that 10%. The state indicated to us as too many. So we ended up cooking it down to one that we thought was a fairly easy cardinal rule. Because here's something I know. If you go into any classroom in this district and you have a teacher who begins the year with those children and you cycle into the year, I would suggest to you that that teacher is the best person to teach in that group of kids of anybody I could put in there. Let me be very candid about that. When a teacher is necessitated to have absence, they have the flu, they're sick, they have a family incident they need to deal with, which all that does happen. The person who I bring in, even though they may be highly trained as a substitute, they could even be the superintendent of schools who's a darn good math teacher. I'm not as good as the math teacher who's been with the kids, because one part of my understanding isn't there. I don't know them. And so my ability to meet their individual needs isn't going to be able to be presented as effectively as the person who has lived the year with them. And so teacher absence is an important standard in my mind. And it does determine our effectiveness of instruction in the classroom, in my view. Now, there aren't hard and fast rules to that, and we have to figure out how that comes together. But that's why we went to attendance as a criteria that was important. Because Any student who doesn't have consistent educational approach with high value teaching loses out on education on that day. And so if I put a very good substitute in a classroom, that isn't as good as their normal teacher being there. And so I think we need a system that evokes teachers being in their classrooms almost every day. Makes sense to me. And that's really what the system did. Now, we didn't have full agreement on that. So another way to look in at it is go out to the folks that look in at what's happening in the classroom. If you're a kinder, first and second grader, it's believed that you're not able to answer a survey effectively about your teacher, about their teaching practices. So the system the state has produced says that a parent would do that. However, for third graders on up, guess what? They believe that the student is the proper survey person. Now that survey is still being developed, and the rubric to measure it's still being developed. And I wasn't comfortable making that a hard and fast criteria. But after talking with our partners in our representative unions, we agreed that that could be another factor, so we added that. In fact, we gave our teachers a choice to choose one or the other as that 10% criteria. That's a sense of fairness we try to bring in. And we'll continue to work through that. In fact, I just want you to know that after all the dust is settled, after we know what the survey instrument looks like and the rubrics look like, I'm going to allow something called a switch and roll. You can decide as a teacher, if I chose one and I don't feel comfortable about it, I'll give you one time to choose the other. And then we're going to use that as part of our evaluation tool. It's for 10%. What other questions may I ask?
I know you mentioned that the testing is the most controversial part, the most vocal part that they're telling us. How do you respond to some people's argument that students are being over-tested and there's too much pressure being put on it, not just on the students, but also on the teachers' part as well?
Yeah, and let me kind of frame that, because it's an easy answer to a complex question. It really is. So testing has always been there. When I was a math teacher, I gave a quiz every other day was my standard. That's a test. Do you know that? It's called a formative test, formative evaluation. Now we've formalized that. I used to give end of unit tests. That's another formative evaluation. Then I gave finals. Term we use of art and education, that's called a summative evaluation. The difference between today and yesteryear is today we're all agreeing to the same test. Yesteryear I got to produce it as a teacher. And that really is the defining difference. Now if I look at my high school curriculum, my high school testing, and I'm going to leave NMSBA out for a moment and the end of course exam question, and I'm just going to talk about the general testing climate, including the first take of NMSBA, just to that point. It is 1.8% of the wheel time or the instruction time in our high schools today in Las Cruces. We test 1.8% of the time. Before this time, we were at 1.6%. Yes, we've increased testing by 0.2% according to the stats I've looked at. I think there's a lot of concern about that because testing doesn't just inform student performance now in this evaluation system, it also defines teacher performance. And I think that becomes even a more salient part of the concern and the worry. I don't see the wheel time question. I think there's a tremendous amount of emphasis, and I am very concerned about end of course exams and about our diploma acquisition process today, and that's yet another discussion I think we need to have outside of this setting. Last question. I want to thank you all. I know you have things to do and places to go like outside. Please do that. Be safe. It'll be a wonderful environment to be in. And thank you for being here today.